I'm going to start this KD presentation. Let me introduce myself first of all. So my name is Onyedikachi, and today I'm going to be taking on quite an interesting topic, that's introduction to Vue. Then after that, we are going to find many comparisons between Vue.js and Angular. But the thing is, before we actually talk about Vue, because I know that probably only a few people here might have heard about the framework Vue before, or even Angular, as a matter of fact. So I figured that the best thing to do was to go back to the basics. Okay, so a couple of years ago, probably about 15, 20, 10 years, then when the web browser, when www became implemented, then they were for front-end development, there were no frameworks. So what most people had to do was you create ordinary HTML files, create ordinary CSS files, and then practically like the more complicated the website, the harder it is to keep track of everything that you are doing. And as a result of this, people now decide to come up with simple frameworks that are going to help in the development process, and also in order to like break down everything into components, so that, let's say, for example, now you want to create a complex website or a complex web app. It will be easy for you to track all the changes you've done. It will be easy for you to like update the site and other various other functions. So, and like I said earlier, Vue.js and AngularJS are both frameworks. And mind you, there's actually a difference between a framework and a library. Now, for example, as you can see here, a framework is a pre-written app structure for you to build on top of. So basically, you can see a framework as a skeleton. Okay, for example, let me give a real-world example. Now, I'm sure that most of you have heard about IKEA here before, right? Okay, for those of you who haven't, it's kind of like the largest furniture wholesale and retail in the US. Now, imagine if you wanted to buy a chair and you went to IKEA. Now, in this situation, what you have is a library. Why? Because that chair acts as a library because it performs only one specific function, which is for you to sit down in your home, right? Meaning that you already have a home. Are you guys getting what I'm saying? Because right now I'm trying to like differentiate between a framework and a library. Because over the years I've come to realize that most people end up being confused about it. So like I said earlier, you went there, you already have a home, and you bought a chair. That chair acts as a library. Why? Because it has only one specific function. Now, okay, but imagine a different scenario where you do not have a home. So before you get that chair, you need a home. And for you to get the home, you have to meet either a constructor, a bricklayer, an architect. And when, let's say, you meet the engineer who's in charge of constructing, who's going to be in charge of constructing the house, definitely they need to draw plans. There have to be blueprints for that house. Now, those blueprints, which are kind of a set of instructions, principles on how we are going to follow to build the house, those blueprints now refer to a framework. So when we now enter the realm of software development, you can now see it as a structure, kind of an architecture that you have to follow while building your software. Okay, so I'm also aware that most of you, both tech and non-tech, are also familiar with the word front-end, back-end, full stack, and all whatnot. No, so basically, front-end is a presentation layer of your application. And what do I mean by presentation layer? It's the UI, the user interface of your app, what the user is able to see, what the user is able to interact, which is why in most cases it is known as UI/UX, that is user interface / user experience design. Okay, and now a very, very important factor now is, do you really need a framework? Most people, let's say the first framework they learned is Angular. The first framework they learned is React. But what most people don't understand is that, no, you don't actually need a framework. For example, if you are to build a very, very simple website or web app that doesn't have much functionalities or features and doesn't need real-time updates, in that kind of scenario, you do not need a framework. But if you want let's say a website that, okay, the data, the state of that website is going to change from time to time. That is when you need a framework. So for those of you who are into programming, or for those of you who plan to go into programming, you ought to know, you ought to be able to discern when and if you actually need a framework. Okay, so what is Vue? Okay, so here it says a progressive framework for building user interface. Now, here, progressive frameworks, kind of, some call it both progressive and reactive frameworks. So in this scenario, what it's trying to say is that for a framework, especially a front-end framework for that matter, to be progressive or reactive, it simply means that that framework has to have like a template model. And template here refers to, let's say, a kind of structure. So the template model has to be connected to the HTML markup. And of course, HTML, hypertext markup language. So it has to be connected to the HTML markup and has to be able to update depending on the data model. So it's just like, for example, you've got a JSON data. JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So JSON is kind of like a way for you to send data to someone. It's kind of like, it looks like an object, for those of you who are very, very familiar in programming. So let's say you have a data model, and you want to now display the data in that model to your front end. Now, there is a very, very high possibility that over time, probably every 1 second, every 2 minutes, every hour, every week, that data is going to change. In this kind of scenario, we call it state change. Now, what happens is, for a framework to be progressive, the framework needs to be able to change the HTML markup of that site immediately that data changes. So in this case, that is what I mean by progressive or reactive framework. And as you can see, for building user interface, so it is designed from the ground up to be incrementally adoptable. Now, incrementally adoptable, meaning that, now, Vue is sort of like a very, very lightweight framework. Lightweight in the sense that you can, let's say you want to undertake on a project, and you want to, for example, let's say in Angular now, most times in Angular, by the time you are building, let's say, a very, very large and complicated project, you realize that if you don't track your changes properly, over time, as you start trying to add like new libraries to the entire project, you start receiving very, very annoying errors. And I'm very, very sure most of you, for example, those in mobile app, this team, you guys have experienced that before. So in that kind of situation, it becomes very, very, very hard. But what Vue does is that now, for example, with Vue, what it means is that you can decide to build an app, you can use Ionic, you can use Vue. All you have to do is that, okay, for example, in the login page, you can say, okay, I want to use Vue to design the UI of the login page. Then in the register page, you can now say, okay, I want to use Ionic. And mind you, Ionic is another framework for developing mobile apps. So in the register page, you can now say, okay, I want to use Ionic to now design the UI of this page. And you notice that in that kind of scenario, you will not encounter any errors. Why? Because the way Vue is like designed, the way it is structured, it's structured in such a way that it can easily be decoupled. I guys get what I'm saying? Okay. So, and it's focused on the Vue layer only, and it's easy to pick up and integrate with other libraries and existing projects. Okay, so this is a statement by Ivan Yu, the founder of Vue.js. So here he's saying it's more flexible, less opinionated solution than Angular that allows you to structure your app the way you want it to be instead of being forced to do everything the Angular way. It's only an interface layer so that you can use it as a light feature in pages instead of full-blown SPA. Now, less opinionated in this case, less opinionated means that, for example, when we talk about frameworks, some frameworks are highly opinionated, example Angular, while others like Vue are less opinionated. Now, what this means is that when a framework is highly opinionated, that framework has a very, very rigid structure. Whatever you're using that framework to build, you must, like it's a must, follow that structure to the T. That's what it means by highly opinionated. So basically, it doesn't give you much wiggle room. You have to follow everything. But in less opinionated, what it now means is that, okay, If you decide, okay, you don't want to follow this way, you can implement another way and something like that. So everything, there's enough space for you to try and branch out and use other libraries and stuff like that. Okay, so now advantages of Vue, it's very, very small size, easy to understand and develop applications, easy integration, detailed documentation, flexibility, and two-way communication. Now, for very, very small size, so most time, this is actually, the size of your framework is a very, very, very important factor when it comes to the performance of your framework. Why? For example, imagine you have a framework that has a size of only, let's say, 50 kilobytes, and then you have another framework of 500 kilobytes. Meaning that by the time you've now used that framework to create, let's say, a website, the smaller framework will probably be around the size of 71 kilobytes, and the larger framework can be up to 1 megabyte. Now, that kind of situation, performance is affected. Why? Because as you know, depending on the area you stay, your internet connection can be at various levels. So now, imagine, let's say, you are using an internet connection of, let's say, 3G, and you are trying to load two websites. One has a size of 71 kilobytes, and another one has a size of 1 MB. Which one do you think will load faster? So this is, oh shit. Oh, sorry, let's just wait for light to come back.